Envious sister broke up my marriage. I then found her cheating and revealed everything at her engagement party. 28M, never imagined I would be writing this. My sister Sandra, 26F, committed something that utterly destroyed my life 3 years ago. I have been preparing my retribution since then. Having at last carried out it, I am considering everything. Let me start from the beginning. 3 years ago, my then-girlfriend Kathy was in a wonderful relationship with me. After a year of togetherness, things were going really nicely. I was even considering a proposal. Kathy was clever and hilarious. We clicked in a manner I had never known before. I ran across Kathy at a birthday celebration for a mutual acquaintance. We hit it right away and spent hours discussing everything from our dream future to our favorite things. Passionate about her work, she was a pediatric nurse who told me had a humorous tale about the children she cared for. Though I'm sure half of it went over her head, I was working as a software engineer, and she would listen patiently as I rumbled on about my most recent projects. Though no relationship is flawless, we always worked through our problems and ours. We both wanted it to work, and I honestly thought she was the one. We had even begun discussing housekeeping together. And she is Sandra, my sister. In our family, she has always been the shining child. Sandra got whatever she asked for. This generated a lot of conflicts between us growing up, but as adults we had managed to keep a really friendly relationship. Although Sandra is 2 years my junior, her treatment by our parents would never indicate this. She was always the family's star, valedictorian in high school, full scholarship to an Ivy League university, earned a well-paying job straight out of school. I was the underachievement student attending a state university who required several years to establish myself in my field of work. Though I was glad Sandra was successful, it was difficult to continually feel as though I was living in her shadow. Every family supper became a celebration of Sandra's most recent success, while my own efforts went hardly recognized. I was shy when I brought Kathy to my house. I wanted them to see how delighted she made me. They should like her. And initially they seemed to enjoy her. Out of the blue one day, Kathy broke up with me. Tears welling up, she accused me of cheating on her with other women. Not even had I glanced at another woman, let alone cheated. She stated Sandra had provided her proof text conversations, pictures, the works when I asked her where she had received this idea. I suffered greatly. Kathy wouldn't listen when I attempted to say it was all a fake. She blocked me on everything and I never had an opportunity to sort things out. I felt perplexed and devastated. I missed meals and struggled to sleep during the next several weeks. I continued going back over every moment of our relationship in my thoughts, trying to find where it all went wrong. Not my proudest moment, I contacted Kathy many times, leaving voicemails, emails, even one visit to her job. She wanted nothing to do, though, with me. Though it took some time, I finally worked out what had happened. Sandra had created all the proof of my claimed cheating. She had created fictitious text chats using photo editing tools and even altered some of my innocent pictures of Paul's to seem compromised. Sandra resisted even trying to refute it when I challenged her about it. She just shrugged and remarked, "You were getting very cheerful." It irritated me. It dawned on me then how quite nasty my sister was. She had destroyed my relationship only out of disgust at seeing me content. Though Sandra laughed it off, I was enraged. She advised me there was nothing I could do about it. Our parents sided with her as usual. They claimed I had done something to set Sandra off and that she would never act in such manner uninvoked. With them, it stayed the same always. I tried to tell them what had happened, how Sandra had falsified data and wrecked my relationship. They would not, however, hear it. My mother only gave me a pat on the hand and remarked, "I'm sure you're exaggerating, sweetheart. Sandra never would have done that." Even worse, my dad told me to man up and stop blaming my sister for my marital woes. I decided then I would not let this pass. I knew I had to be patient even though I intended to make Sandra pay. I had to wait for the just right moment. I hung around slowly for 3 years. I feigned everything between us was good. I even began spending more frequent time with Sandra and her partner, Thomas. Knowing what kind of person Sandra truly was, I honestly felt horrible for Thomas, a wonderful man. In a partner, Thomas was everything Sandra could possibly want. He came from a rich background, was accomplished and attractive. More than that, though, he was sincerely friendly and thoughtful. He had a knack of making people feel important and heard, always remembered everyone's birthdays, was the first to give assistance when someone needed it. Sandra paraded Thomas around like a trophy, flaunting him on family get-togethers and on social media. But I also observed the times when she felt no one was looking, the eye rolls when Thomas said something she thought dumb, and the annoyed sighs when he took too long to accomplish something. I poured myself into my job over this period. After a promotion, I started making more money than I had ever known. I even dated somewhat, but nothing significant. After what occurred with Kathy, I found it difficult to completely trust anyone. I saw Sandra acting strangely about 6 months ago. She was usually on her phone, grinning at texts, and justifying the lone trips. She was having an affair. It took no brilliance to know what was happening. I avoided addressing her. Rather, I began compiling data. Though that sounds sinister, I wanted evidence. I was able to grab screenshots of her chatting with another man and pictures of her with him. Sandra comes out not very good at hiding her phone passcode, the works. Robert was a co-worker from the office that she was cheating with. He was everything Thomas lacked: aggressive, haughty, the kind of man believing he was God's gift to women. In their letters, Sandra and Robert would ridicule Thomas, labeling him as dull and predictable. Reading about that made me nauseous. Thomas told me last week he intended to pop the question to Sandra. He even brought the ring right to me. Beautiful, a family heirloom passed on from his grandma. Thomas told me all about his ideas for the proposal and their future together, clearly thrilled. I realized it was time to act at that point. The day the proposition was scheduled arrived. Thomas had scheduled a large surprise celebration including all of their relatives and friends. He was going to pop the question front to everyone. I got up and called for everyone's attention just as he was ready to down one knee. I came right out with it. I gave everyone proof of Sandra's affair. I told her how 3 years ago she had destroyed my relationship out of sheer hate and how this was karma playing back off. The room became still. Thomas let out a startled gasp. Sandra was shrieking at me to stop and weeping, but I stopped only once I had enumerated every last detail. Showing them pictures of Sandra and Robert together, leaving a motel, I reviewed some of their text messages, including ones in which Thomas was teased. I even told Robert how much superior he was than Thomas using a voicemail Sandra left for him. Thomas then disappeared, utterly devastated. Sandra was crying, yelling at me 1 minute, then pleading with Thomas to return. Though it was useless, our parents were trying to cool everyone down. Sandra dropped by my apartment in the aftermath. She was a disaster, crying and insisting I mend things. She claimed Thomas was the nicest thing that had ever happened to her and I had destroyed her life. I simply chuckled and told her now she understood how it felt. In what way could you treat me? You are my sister. She repeated saying this over and over. How can I accomplish this? I said again, how could you sour my friendship with Kathy? How could you fool her such that she thinks I was cheating? Sandra was perplexed at the audacity. Years ago, she said, was that? You seem to be past it. I went crazy at that point. I told her exactly what I thought of her, how she had always been harsh and self-serving, how her parents' favorism had transformed her into a monster. She earned everything that was happening to her, I told her. She left my flat crying, and I have not heard from her since. Our parents have been phoning nonstop, leaving voicemails about how I have split the family apart. They are expecting my apologies to Sandra and try to mend things with Thomas. It has been several days now, and I am considering everything. Thomas was a nice man, thus I felt sorry for him. Still, I feel Sandra received what she was due at the same time. Update 1: a lot has transpired since my last post around 1 month ago. I want to thank every person who left comments and offered ideas. Reviewing your comments helped me to see that although many of you believed Sandra deserved what she received, some also noted I could have gone too far by injuring Thomas in the course of things. Having some time to consider, here is a summary of the circumstances. First of all, the aftermath from the rejected idea has been really strong. Our family is absolutely in chaos. My folks understandably are enraged with me. They have been phoning and messaging nonstop, alternately guilt-tripping me and threatening to cut me off should I fail to try to mend matters by apologizing to Sandra. Mostly I have been ignoring their messages. But once I responded to let them know I had no intention of apologizing, and that if they wanted to cut me off, they ought to go ahead. That briefly took them down, but after a few days they came back. Sandra has been silent, on the other hand. She hasn't personally contacted me following her first outburst at my flat. Mutual friends have told me she's a disaster, hardly leaves her apartment, misses work, dismisses calls from everyone. When I recall how she laughed when she told me she had wrecked my relationship with Kathy, all guilt I might have had disappears. Regarding Kathy, 2 weeks after the incident, she sent me an unexpected note. She wanted to talk since she had heard about what transpired among the folks. I accepted to coffee with her. It seemed odd to see Kathy once more 3 years later. She looked largely the same. She told me I owed an apology. I should have paid you back then some attention. I should have let you have time to clarify. I stared in shock. Kathy groaned and said she remembered how determined Sandra was about my purported adultery and how she had all this evidence after learning what occurred with Sandra and Thomas. She never felt right about it, but at the time she was too wounded and angry to challenge it. She then understood Sandra could do some quite horrible things. We spoke for several hours. Kathy shared with me her 3-year life's events. Though hardly significant, she had changed hospitals, received a promotion, and even dated a little. I avoided mentioning how much her leaving had upset me while I filled her in on my life too. Kathy stopped as we were ready to go and asked whether we might try once more. I knew it was wrong, even if part of me still loved Kathy. Too much had changed. Though I'm not sure whether we will, I gently said that it wasn't a great idea and we hugged and promised to keep in touch. Now, on to Thomas. I got a text from him asking whether we might get together 1 week after the rejected proposition. Though shocked, I agreed to see him in a nearby pub. Thomas was there enjoying a beer when I got there. He looked bad, dark bags beneath his eyes, a messy beard. When I sat down, he hardly turned to look. I owe you a thank you, he said, and a punch in the face. I braced myself, but he just sighed and drank another sip of his drink. I appreciate you bringing Sandra forward for me, he went on. I needed to know. But Guy, was that your only way of doing it? Before everybody? I really felt bad. I hadn't considered how it would affect Sandra. I was completely consumed with exacting revenge. Thomas accepted my apologies, and we sat silently for some while, both lost in our thoughts. Thomas talked further about his relationship with Sandra and how he had been preparing to propose for months, but had been postponing it since something felt strange as the evening drew on. He said that, before proceeding with the proposition, part of him felt relief at learning. We kept talking, and Thomas even inquired about my past with Sandra. I told him everything, our parents' partiality and what she did to Kathy's relationship. Realizing he had no idea who Sandra truly was, Thomas was appalled. Thomas and I had developed an improbable relationship by night's conclusion. We traded numbers and agreed to stay in touch. Thomas and I began routinely hanging together over the next 2 weeks. We discussed everything while we got together for drinks or to see a game. Thomas arrived at my flat one evening looking concerned. Sandra remarked, trying to get in touch. She had been phoning, texting, and even showing up at his place once, pleading for still another opportunity. What did he intend to accomplish? I asked him. Thomas admitted he was torn. Given their 2 years together, after all, part of him wanted to hear her out. He knew, though, he would never be able to trust her once more. She had lied to him for perhaps months, maybe years. Thomas saw Sandra for coffee the next day. Later on, he called to let me know he had decided to call it good. He kept his stance, reminding Sandra that her adultery was a choice she made frequently, not a mistake. She deserved more. Sandra found it objectionable. She lashed out and sobbed alternately, even trying to blame me, claiming I had poisoned Thomas against her. Thomas, however, kept his ground and informed her I had just told the truth. Sandra then whirled even farther. She began putting cryptic, attention-seeking statements on social media, obviously trying to present herself as the victim. Predictably, our parents helped up and pushed me to assist Sandra win Thomas back and apologize to her. They threatened to write me out of will when I objected. I advised them to proceed. I would much prefer have my integrity than their money. This has let me see how poisonous my family is. Starting to work through these problems, I have seen a therapist and found great benefit. I'm learning to establish limits and handle the guilt trips my parents attempt to inflict onto me. Working has been a nice diversion. Working long hours to escape everyone, I put myself into a large project. My supervisor observed the additional work and made hints about a promotion should I keep it up. Regarding my romantic life, it has been non-existent since all this started. Though I'm not ready, some friends have tried to set me up. For a bit, I have to concentrate on myself. Though I'm good living alone right now, maybe one day I'll be ready to trust someone once more. Thomas appears to be doing better. Saying he needs to release his anger, he has been routinely visiting the gym. He also registered for cooking lessons, something he had always wanted to do but Sandra discouraged. It's encouraging to see him giving his own pleasure and self first priority attention. Regarding the future, my connection with my parents is strained, and I have no idea whether it would ever mend. From what I gather, Sandra still is a mess. She has missed work, and there are speculations she might lose her employment. I get some gratification from that. Next month, Thomas and I have a guy's trip booked. Getting away from the drama for a little will be nice. I don't regret revealing Sandra's affair ultimately. I appreciate all of your listening to my narrative. Should anything noteworthy transpires, I will notify you. I'm signing off to live my life, on my own terms, free from Sandra's shadow at last for now. But my last update was a year ago, hence I believed it was appropriate to provide you all a last update on the developments. Lots has changed, and at last I am ready to conclude this chapter of my life. Let us first address Sandra. Things deteriorated before they improved once her affair came to light and her relationship with Thomas ended. She lost her work, in part because of her prolonged absence, and in part because of the allegations about her personal life compromising her professional reputation. She lived back in with our parents for some time. They patted her, treating her as a victim, and blamed me for destroying her life. Even Sandra, though, could not sustain the passion indefinitely. She had a terrible blowout with our parents around 3 months after returning home. At last, she broke under their expectations and admitted everything what she had done to Kathy years ago. Shocked, our parents had to see Sandra for her true nature. It was not attractive. Sandra moved out at last. There was a lot of cursing and tears. She's reportedly living in a small apartment on the other side of the city, working retail, and often going to therapy. Regarding my parents, they tried to get in touch with me following Sandra's admissions. I first disregarded them, still wounded and enraged over years of being considered second best. Eventually, though, I decided to meet with them following therapist urging. The conference felt uncomfortable. Apologies, tears, and awkward pauses abound. They came clean about many things they had been mistaken about and acknowledged they had failed me in several respects as parents. Although I valued their candor, I also made it plain that our connection would not be restored with just one chat. We have been gently rebuilding over the last year. It's not flawless, yet there are occasional flashes of old behavior. Still, we're trying. I'm learning to be open to them once they demonstrate a real curiosity in my life and job. Though it's still under development, there is nonetheless progress. Let us now turn to Thomas. That camping vacation we had scheduled turned out just what each of us needed. Away from cell phones and the internet, a week in the bush allowed us both the opportunity to let go. Thomas is doing currently really well. He plunged himself into the cooking courses I mentioned, and it turns out he has actual ability for it. He even mentioned creating his own restaurant someday. Regarding his romantic life, he began dating once more 6 months ago. Lisa, the new girl, strikes me as being really friendly, down to earth, and truly kind. That makes me glad for him. I still am good friend of Thomas. We get together often for beers and sporting viewing. Having a friend who knows the whole situation and who I can be really honest with is great. He now feels to me like a brother, the sibling bond I always yearned for with Sandra. Regarding my job, my manager pointed out a promotion I could have. Though in a different sense, the increased accountability has been demanding. It's pushed me outside of my comfort zone and challenged me to develop. I'm happy with what I have done and forward my career in great excitement. Regarding my love life, I have lately started dating after I had time to concentrate on myself and recuperate. About 4 months ago, I happened upon Nora at a business conference. We bonded right away over our mutual love of esoteric sci-fi books and awful jokes. Nora understands my background with Sandra and Kathy. Telling her made me anxious since she would assume I arrived carrying too much baggage. She is, nevertheless, quite sympathetic. She has helped me to realize that I deserve love and happiness just as much as everyone else and that what occurred was not my fault. Though still early, Nora's things are going nicely. We are moving slowly and laying a basis of open communication and trust. Regarding Kathy, our relationship has been amicable but detached. That's about it. We sometimes like each other's posts on social media or send a quick happy birthday text. Though I'm happy we were able to clear the air and find some closure, I believe we both knew our time as a couple was past. Sandra and I hadn't communicated personally in months. The last time was at a family meal our parents insisted upon. It was uncomfortable and tense. Sandra shot me bitter looks while alternately trying too hard to seem normal. Ultimately, we both agreed at least for now that it would be better if we stayed apart. Though we are not yet there, perhaps someday we will be able to have a true conversation about everything that transpired. It's difficult to fathom how much has changed when one looks back over the past 4 years. The hate and resentment that propelled me for so long has subsided. I still believe Sandra's actions were horrible. Thus, I'm not sorry for revealing her affair. I'm sitting in my new apartment writing this last post. I walked out of that apartment with all the memories of Sandra's cherry, and now find myself staring out at set. Tomorrow, I'm meeting Thomas and Emma for lunch. Nora is dropping over later for a movie night. Though it never is, life is good. It is not perfect, very excellent. To those of you who have read my narrative from the start, thank you. Your encouragement, guidance, even your criticism, all of which helped me negotiate this trying phase in my life. By telling my tale, maybe some of you too have benefited. If nothing else, it should be evident that there is always hope for a better future, even if things seem worse now.